Greetings, ghosts and ghouls, and welcome to Bad Boo, a podcast conjured for the curious where we explore all things fright, flicks, and folklore.
We are your haunting hosts, Sam and Jodie, guiding you through every episode of occult exploration and holding your hand the whole way through.
So if you like the sound of spook screams and symphonies, keep listening as we unravel our mystic matter for this week.
In today's episode, we'll be unravelling the mischievous origins of Winter Elves and the not-so-nice history behind them.
Ooh.
So going a bit niche for today's episode.
Very niche.
Sort of like an off-kilter niche version of our fairy tales episode.
Mm-hmm. And if you haven't seen that, you know what we're going to go and say. Check it out.
Check it out. And this is our second Christmas/festive themed episode.
It very much is. So if you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to comment below and let us know. You can also drop a like on the video, and don't forget to turn on the post notification bell while you're there, and subscribe, because only cool people are subscribed to Bad Boo. So.
Exactly. And we hope you got your Christmas tree up if you celebrate Christmas, and let us know how you decorated it.
Mm-hmm. What colour have you gone for?
Yeah.
Is it red? Is it green? We were tempted to go for black baubles this year, but we couldn't really find them, and we were in a bit of a rush, so we've gone for silver and gold.
But it's very nice. So keep an eye on the Bad Boo Instagram, because we'll be definitely putting up some pictures there. But we digress. As we start every Bad Boo episode, we go right back to the start of what the content is. And if you haven't guessed by the title, Santa's Little Gremlins, we're actually going into a little bit of the pointy-eared friends, which are elves.
Yes.
So
let's start with the golden question, as we always do. What are elves?
So, an elf, by definition, is a supernatural being traditionally from European folklore. And it's traditionally a small, magical, sort of humanoid spirit connected to nature, where it can be sometimes mischievous or sometimes benevolent, but later evolving into fantasy sort of tales, into sort of very tall or wise or immortal or pointy-eared humanoids. And of course, in modern Christmas sort of lore, they sort of became Santa's sort of pointy-hatted toy makers. So while folklore sort of describes them as sort of being an unpredictable being of sort of the wild or fantasy elves, sort of popularised by Tolkien, so like in Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, are noble, powerful, and sort of long-lived, sort of contrasting with sort of the small, childlike Christmas elves who assist Santa. So it's such a varied topic in itself, which is why it sort of has its own episode in our podcast.
And of course, it sounds like that there's two sides to an elf. There's the actually multiple sides to what an elf could be. There's the nice, natural side, which could be the humanoid one, or could be the tiny little pointy-eared friend one, or there's the darker, mischievous side.
And don't worry, we'll be getting onto the darker side very soon.
And then there's obviously the Santa side.
Of course. A little bit of Christmas spirit in there. So
let's go into the kind of nature of elves and where they come from. So the term elf fundamentally refers to the class of supernatural intelligent beings found in Germanic and Norse mythology. Also, the word elf derives from the Old Norse word, excuse my pronunciation, of alpha, which is A with a little apostrophe above it, L, F, and an R. In this type of mythology, it meant that elves are really distinct from gods and humans. So they kind of occupy the space that sits somewhere between the two races of beings. And they're often depicted as having really extended lifespans, like they do in Lord of the Rings, and basically being immortal. Yeah. Which is really freaking cool if you ask me, but also terrifying. Yeah. I feel like low-key elves are scarier than vampires as far as the whole no dying thing goes.
Yes, they stick around for a little while, let's put it like
that. With the whole relationship that they have to the gods, according to this Norse mythology again, they are usually closely linked to signs of fertility, and also ancestral spirits, with them sometimes even being seen as elevated ancestors. And this is particularly from the Vanir gods, who were associated with nature and things like that, as they had a particularly strong relationship with elves, so that's where a lot of their kind of mythology and backstory has come from.
It's kind of interesting. Again, you can kind of see where it influenced like Tolkien in sort of Lord of the Rings or fantasy epics, like books or films or whatever. That's kind of definitely more from the Norse route, for sure, I reckon. But however, in regards to sort of like realms and of like elves, in the Norse sort of cosmological system, elves are generally divided into sort of two main categories. So you'll have the light elves, which I'm not going to even pronounce the name of that because that is like full on Norse. So
I'm going to try.
Okay, Jodie's going to have a quick go.
You ready? Okay, so it's spelt Ljosalfar. I think it's Josalfar.
That's what we're going to go with, and we're not going to say it again.
No.
But if you know how to pronounce it, please do comment and let us know.
Sounds like something you'd find in IKEA.
Or Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Yeah, or IKEA. But yes, the realms, the light elves, are associated with the Alfheimr, which is considered to be like the elf home, so like the light elf home. The nature around them is often very beautiful and luminous and often benevolent, and they lived in the upper world and were associated with the heavens, the light, and the sun. So if you like Lord of the Rings, it's kind of like your Rivendell.
Yeah.
If you like, sort of very heavenly, very blissful, very pretty, very serene, nice, you know.
But just on the counter of that, we also have dark elves, aka, bear with us again on the pronunciation, this one is spelled Svartalfar. So I'm going to assume that it's the Svartalfar?
That's how I'd have said it.
Yeah?
Yeah. I'll go with that.
We'll assume that it's that. So they're commonly associated with the Svartalfheimr, which is the black elf home. And with being associated with that, their nature side means that they are often equated with dwarves, who are actually seen as like cunning and skilled craftsmen, because they work with the earth and like subterranean worlds, as well as mining and like metals, but they weren't inherently evil, so they're just more prone to anger or being isolated.
So they're sort of more like your outcast of elves, if that makes sense.
But if we're talking about anger, Yoda said that anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering.
Yeah.
And that's how you become
Darth
a Sith Lord.
Yeah, so you're kind of cooked if that's you. If you're an elf and
that's how you
kind of
become
gone down
evil
the dark elf line, you're kind of screwed. However, the core characteristics of these elves is that they possessed an innate sort of set of magical abilities. And particularly sort of concerning invisibility, illusion, or causing or healing certain ailments. So they can kind of pick and choose, I suppose, what they want to do. But they're often believed to influence the well-being of humans and livestock, and often required sort of appeasement or respect to prevent illness or misfortune.
I think that's where their link to the gods comes in as well, because obviously like we pray to the gods, we try to appease them by giving them offerings and all these different types of things, and we pay them respect.
There's kind of got to be that respect in order to get it back type of thing, otherwise they'll be kind of mischievous and not so nice. But in their purest form, elves are a powerful, distinct and sophisticated supernatural race that lives alongside or perhaps just beneath humanity, wielding influence over nature and fortune itself. So they kind of like things being done their way, by the sounds of things, and if things get out of line or if the creatures they interact with step out of line, they don't like it.
They're kind of like the guardians of nature.
They are.
Essentially.
They are. They can be in this regard.
Yeah, and getting a little bit more into their origins, pretty much. The origins of elves are rooted in ancient beliefs. Like we said, is from like the Germanic and Norse peoples of Northern Europe. But this actually dates all the way back to the Viking Age and even earlier than that. So their concept arose from early like cosmology, and attempts to basically categorize like the powerful non-human forces that potentially influence the world.
Yeah.
So in the same time that people were praying to like the ancient like Grecian gods like Zeus and all that type of stuff, Over on the opposite side of the world, with the Germanic, well, not opposite side of the world, just a little bit further across in Europe somewhere.
Yeah.
But the Vikings and the Nordic people and Germanic people were looking for elves.
Yeah. So that's part of their little tradition, I suppose, and what they believed in.
Mm-hmm.
You can see where all these sort of fantastical creatures come from, and it always seems to be from this type of era.
Yeah.
/ European
exactly.
folklore, which is really interesting.
And the most substantial and earliest surviving records of elves come from Old Norse sources, which are particularly from the 13th century Icelandic Eddas, which is a record of older oral traditions. And it basically goes to speak about the Alfar, which is Old Norse and Germanic cosmology, as we just previously mentioned. And in this cosmology, elves, or the Alpha, are created to fill a specific tier in the hierarchy of existence. So it ranks just below the gods, which is Asir and Vanir, but just above humans. So it's gods at the top, elves in the middle, and then humans just underneath that.
They're the in-betweens.
Yeah, it's all a pyramid scheme, basically.
Uh-huh.
No, it's not. We hate pyramid schemes here.
No.
Don't buy into them.
Not my camera.
Yeah. But basically, they're an entire race of intelligent, powerful beings that are distinct from the gods, but also from humans.
Yes, elves were closely linked, like you say, to these Vanir gods, particularly a god called Frey, which is the god of fertility, sun, and rain. And in the realm of the light elves, Alfamir was given to Frey as a special gift, cementing the elves' association with nature, growth, and fertility. So it's kind of, like I say, there is that interplay between humans and gods, but more so gods, because they're kind of let's say, that sort of happy middle ground.
Demigods, aren't they? Because it feels like they're a mix of the two.
Yeah. Sort of that in-between part.
Yeah, but there's also the thing of if any of you have seen Clash of the Titans or anything, is it Clash of the Titans or Wrath of the Titans? I can't remember. I think there's 2 films about both. Whatever one has the same guy from Avatar in it. I've forgotten the name of the actor.
Yeah. I cannot remember.
They basically talk about how demigods are actually more powerful than gods because they possess the human traits of being empathetic and things like that, and relying on your emotions to control your powers, rather than just being a god and not being related to the emotion of it all, and rather than just being a human and being all emotion. So it's
kind of that in between sort of good,
yeah,
perfect blend between the two.
So who knows? Maybe elves are more powerful than gods.
We hope not, in some regards to some things we're going to be speaking about soon. But one prominent theory suggests that elves originated as sort of defied ancestral spirits, like we said earlier. So essentially, over time, the spirits of the dead, particularly those who are powerful or important, may have evolved into the class of semi-divine beings known as elves, explaining their connection to burial mounds and lineage.
Ooh.
So like we say, again, just adds the fuel to that fire of the fact that they are that middle ground between the two.
Yeah.
And they possess sort of the human side of consciousness, but also the power of sort of gods and the supernatural sort of abilities.
Yeah, maybe we don't want them to be more powerful than gods then, if that's where they're coming from.
It depends what type of elf it is, I suppose.
Yeah. So the Old English word for a being or a creature was actually wit, which is spelled W-I-H-T. And it's coming from the word nowadays of wight, which is W-I-G-H-T. And it's basically just a linguistic that was associated commonly with elves, as it was just given as a main category for any powerful, mysterious, non-human entity or thing that exists in the world. Which, for those of you that know where we live, that's a very, very interesting and very, very important tie to our little island.
Yes, because we live on the Isle of Wight. And the sort of Wight actually being associated with the word supernatural and the sort of that association, like we say, with elves or little creatures and stuff like that is very cool. But we'll go into that into our next section.
And as we mentioned before, there are obviously the two different sections of elves. There are the light elves and the dark elves. And just another thing that we didn't get to earlier was that the light elves are actually associated with like the sky and light and obviously goodness. And like we did just briefly touch on, the darker elves are obviously associated with earth and mining and craftsmanship, and like the kind of darker activities that kind of possess the human realm.
Yeah.
But that often led to them being associated with dwarves in most like Scandinavian traditions later on in the 13th and 14th century.
Yeah.
And so basically the ancient like mythological origin for them as the distinct powerful like nature linked beings that we just spoke about is the source for all later European folklore that came after that, such as like the fair folk and the changeling myths that were particularly popular in Ireland, as well as the destructive nightmare elves, and even elves as we know it today, which have just descended from there.
Yeah, there's so many variables of what an elf is, and as we can see, it comes in so many different forms. But down the festive route, really, elves today, when you say, oh, an elf, you talk about elves, you either think of the film with Will Ferrell, or you think of
Elf on the
probably
Shelf.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
or Christmas, essentially.
Yes, yeah, Christmas,
so
basically.
Christmas is essentially probably what most people in Western culture would think of when they think of elves.
I just realised there's no Christmas song that focuses on elves, is there?
I don't think
like,
so.
There's the Christmas song.
There's not one that comes to mind.
Yeah, there's the Christmas songs from Elf, the film.
Yeah.
But there's no Christmas songs that focus on elves.
No.
Like, you have like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and you got like obviously all the ones about Santa.
You've got like Eric the Elf or
about
something.
like Christmas trees. Yeah, there's none about elves. Interestingly enough.
Yeah, maybe I have to make one. There you go. I mean,
if anybody wants a Christmas song about
mind.
elves, then give us a shout. Sure, we can put a little like punky twist on a Christmas song and make it about elves.
Song for you.
Yeah.
However, we digress again, of course. Elves in today's sort of world are portrayed in two fundamentally different yet equally sort of dominant ways in pop culture. And these modern portrayals are largely sort of as a result of 19th century Victorian romanticism sort of filtering the sort of original ancient or dangerous folklore, and the subsequent standardization by modern fantasy writers. So kind of like your Disney treatment, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like with fairy tales, which we spoke about in our fairy tales episode, of how like things have sort of become more sanitized and desensitized as well. It's kind of same thing for elves.
Yeah. For the bad and for the good of
for bad and good
creatures and myths that these laws all apply to.
Absolutely. So, of course, the first one being the sort of diminutive, benevolent helper. So, as in like your Christmas tradition of an elf, and like we say, is the most common and universally recognised sort of portrayal, especially in like modern times. Primarily associated with the Christmas season, which they sort of appear as sort of small or diminutive, sort of pointed ears, rosy cheeks, typically dressed in sort of red or green outfits. So your traditional elf, probably exactly what you thought in your brain when you heard the word elf in our episode today. But they may have like sort of magical abilities in which sort of like to fly or to appear and disappear, and they're sort of consistently benevolent or cheerful or hardworking and loyal, and they serve a sort of very powerful figure. So in this sort of sense, it would be Santa Claus, and are dedicated to sort of craft and labour and supporting communal happiness for like children and people around the globe.
How sweet.
But this portrayal is largely disconnected from the ancient folklore that we spoke about just now, and it emerged from sort of like 19th century Victorian illustrations and poems and different literature like that, which sort of like miniaturized and sanitized European fairy tales, and transformed sort of these powerful spirits into sort of more domestic, lovable characters, I suppose.
That's kind of rude if you think about it.
Yeah.
They just like shut down the entire elf like theology and were like, Christmas helpers.
Christmas helpers.
Yeah.
You guys are the Christmas helpers now.
But on the contrary to our little festive fiends that we've got, as Sam just described, we then have the tall, wise, immortal race, which is just like the fantasy edition of the elves, and that obviously derives more from the mythology that we were just talking about. So this portrayal dominates like fantasy literature, film, gaming, and is basically a romanticized update of the old Norse light elves. So they appear like tall, slender, exceptionally beautiful, hence why they got Orlando Bloom to play it in Lord of the Rings. Usually with pale skin, pointed ears, which are usually quite like exaggerated, and they go like nearly all the way up their head, or like at least halfway. But they generally possess like ethereal, elegant looks, and they're depicted with long hair and fine clothing, just emphasizing their nobility within their character.
So you just think straight away Lord of the Rings is type, probably if you're into your
Yeah.
movies or books or fantasy, folklore or traditions or anything like that, you'll probably jump straight to Lord of the Rings. It's the most iconic depiction of these type of elves, in my opinion.
But anyway, the popular like characterizations that they do have is that they live for millennia pretty much, or they're immortal, so they either have like really delayed aging or they just don't age at all once they hit a certain point. And this gives them immense wisdom, but also a detachment from human morality, where they're also skilled in archery and craftsmanship, but also ancient magic as well. This means that they're often keepers of ancient knowledge, and potentially even like spells and stuff from centuries and centuries ago that people don't know about anymore. They're often portrayed as wise but haughty, viewing like the short-lived human race with a mixture of like pity and condescension, and it was just famously standardized by J.R.R. Tolkien, who obviously wrote The Lord of the Rings. But that's because he drew a lot of inspiration from Old English and Norse mythologies that were then adopted by all of these major fantasy franchises like Dungeons and Dragons and Elder Scrolls and the infamous Lord of the Rings films.
Yes. I love the Elder Scrolls. I mean, Skyrim is one of my favourite games anyway. But again, you can see kind of where these games and different like films have sort of drawn inspiration from.
Yeah.
However, as this is a horror podcast, there isn't necessarily just all nice elves.
No, we're done with the cheer for this episode. That was enough cheer for you for today.
Yes, I'm sorry, boo-hoo, or bamboo. We are going straight down into the dark, nitty-gritty stuff, because we wouldn't just put in the nice, cuddly elves that we know in our horror podcast. This is much more serious.
And that is because there are obviously dark elves with folklore surrounding malice and danger. And that is where we specialise.
We specialise in the sort of the dark side of these folklores and tales, if you like.
Yeah. So, let's go and dabble in some home territory, shall we?
I think that's a great idea.
So, in ancient folklore, elves, or the fair folk or fays, obviously had immense power and were characterised by their capriciousness, but also they're linked to disease and their terrifying interference with human life. And this was kind of broken up into like 4 major areas that the elves could like intercept with, or that caused fear among human people. The first one being their association with death, disease, and pain. This is because in early Norse and Anglo-Saxon traditions, elves were actually blamed for sudden, inexplicable maladies in humans and livestock. So essentially any like disease or death or like natural kind of suffering that could occur, elves were blamed for it. And essentially this meant that if a person or an animal was afflicted with sudden like sharp internal pain or paralysis or seizures or lameness, like anything like that, it meant that it was believed to have come from an invisible elf who had shot the victim with a tiny magical invisible arrow, aka the elf shot is what they used to call it. And this absolutely terrorized people because it meant that there was like an attack coming from invisible like offenders that they just couldn't find or do anything about. And the sudden agonizing pain that it caused often led to death.
Again, pretty grim.
Mm-hmm.
Not nice. It's like we were saying about like witches and werewolves in our last episodes. If you haven't seen our witches or werewolves episode, then please subscribe, check it out. Let us know what you think after this episode. But we actually spoke about these types of things that people trying to sort of justify tragedies or anything that was more natural with like a supernatural or fantastical creature, like witches, like werewolves, like elves in this regard, which actually leads us on to the next type of elf, which is called like a nightmare elf, which kind of links to our episode that we did a couple of episodes ago, which is about nightmares, where certain types of elves were directly connected to the horror of sleep disturbances and assault. So in Germanic folklore, the Alp was considered like a malevolent elf, functionally identical to sort of like an incubus or a night hag, and this elf would visit sleepers and even sit heavily on their chest and induce suffocating nightmares like sleep paralysis as well. So they were kind of like another creature that would do the same type of thing as these night hags that we spoke about.
I'm assuming they look different because, to be honest, I wouldn't mind like Legolas or even Arwen standing at the edge of my bed and like just kind of wishing me a good night, you know.
He'd be like, okay, chill.
Yeah. So I'm assuming they look scary. So don't think that this one is like Arwen because
it's not.
Yeah.
It's
She wouldn't give anybody nightmares.
However, the Alp was also blamed for physically tormenting people and animals, so like tangling hair, which was considered like Alp locks, or giving livestock even nightmares by riding them until exhausted and spoiling food by just breathing on it.
Ooh.
So, bad breath.
Mm-hmm. Make sure you brush your teeth, kids.
Brush your teeth and, have a nice drink of water when you get up in the morning. So that's kind of like another type of dark folklore.
Mm-hmm. And that leads us into our third one, which is the like abduction and replacement aspect of the elf theory, aka the changeling. Which I don't know if you guys have ever heard about changelings before, but it's a really, really cool thing to look into and to research. So I'm sure we'll do an episode about it in the future if you guys would like to hear more about changelings.
That'd be cool. Definitely love to do that.
The idea of a changeling is perhaps the most like famous and terrifying piece of elf folklore, and that is because it's tied directly to the fear of inexplicable loss or disability. This often comes from when elves or the fair folk were believed to be envious of human children that were healthy, and so they would secretly abduct the human child during the night, especially if they were unbaptized, and they would replace it with a changeling, which is an elf infant or a sickly, magically disguised entity. The changeling was often perpetually sickly, cried constantly, and demanded enormous amounts of food or exhibited strange, malicious behaviour. This folklore provided a horrifying explanation for infant death and sudden illness or developmental disabilities, sometimes leading to like desperate parents to abuse or torture the changeling in attempt to force the elves to return the real child.
It's kind of like a very dark version of Elf.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Many he ends up getting in Santa's sack. And
yeah.
Ends up being a human living amongst elves. It's kind of like that. That's kind of like the nice opposite version to the changeling folklore, which is really horrible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would try and I wouldn't be very nice to this changeling, knowing that it wasn't like my real child. To try and get it to give the real one back.
But it also meant that people were actually abusing and torturing their own children.
Oh yeah.
Who did have disabilities.
Yeah.
Just because they didn't know how to navigate that at the time.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's that explanation to, trying to justify and understand what a disability was, and that's the very serious thing back then, especially, which is that's not great at all. But if these things were to be real, then hell, you would ensure that your real child comes back. That leads us on to the final piece of sort of dark elf folklore, I suppose, which sort of like this sort of delves in sort of like the other world, I suppose, of elfish folklore, in which like elves sort of represented a magical or dangerous world that existed just beyond human perception. So like it would be sort of hidden in plain sight, but not quite there. And they were fiercely sort of territorial and easily offended by human trespass or disrespect. And breaking an obscure rule, like failing to leave without an offering of milk or like bread, or accidentally sort of stepping into a fairy circle, could result in a sudden magical retribution, such as curses, madness, or being lured into their realm over, like, to never return.
Ooh.
So that's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
But if a human entered the elves' domain, they may feel like they spent a night dancing and feasting, only to return to the human world and discover that decades had passed, resulting in a devastating loss of their entire mortal life. So kind of, if you know Doctor Who, it kind of goes down that weeping angel type of line.
Yeah.
You get sent back and live out your life till the point you died.
And I was just trying to think of a fact that I've been told, because we're talking about like fairies and elves and especially the changeling, and funny enough, when I went to Dublin like last year, it was a solo trip and I was doing a folklore like tour around like the centre like city of Dublin, and they were actually speaking about changelings and things like that because it was a big part of Irish culture. And the term like away with the fairies, like, oh, they're away with the fairies, or like, oh, sorry, I was away with the fairies, you know, when you're like dissociating or like you stop concentrating on something. It actually comes from the idea of when people's children would get replaced with changelings, or when people's kids did have disabilities and they didn't know how to explain it, they would see the child as a changeling, but for those that weren't abusing them, thankfully, they, when their child would have episodes of like perhaps going mute or like kind of dissociating or whatever it may be, they would say, oh, he's away with the fairies, because they would truly believe that the kid's soul had been taken away and was actually in the fairy realm. So that's where the term away with the fairies comes from. Is actually from,
I did not know that,
the idea of changelings.
I had absolutely no idea about that. So there we go, a little bit of a fun fact to end our Mystic Matter section.
And where we were just mentioning the supernatural meaning associated with the word white, that leads us on to our Isle of Fright section, where we get to talk a little bit more about our spooky island. So we're going to go for a bit of a different approach this time for the Isle of Fright section, and that's because we don't actually have a story this time. We don't have any folklore for you, but we do have some analysis. And as we just briefly mentioned in the last segment, that's because we are going to be looking at the word wight. So Wight. The word wight is an archaic but deeply embedded word in English culture, as well as Norse and Germanic folklore, which carries significant weight, particularly in the fantasy, literature and historical studies of language. In folklore,
So interesting.
the term refers to a being, creature or intelligent entity, often with a specific connection to a physical place or realm. The word wight originally comes from the Old English word of wicht, which is actually just spelt W-I-H-T, which itself derives from the Proto-Germanic word of wheaty. The original meaning was simply a thing or creature or being, or just plainly something that exists, as it was a neutral term that could refer to any living thing, whether it was human, animal or spirit.
So interesting. So while largely obsolete in common English, the word white actually survives in sort of like a very notable being and word that we know, which is like the word witch, as in like your pointy nose, pointy hat kind of witch. Often believed to sort of be derived from the word wit, like we said earlier, or like a related term sort of implying a powerful or supernatural being. So there is that connection to the Isle of Wight, the word white and witch,
Yeah.
which probably explains why in the film The Witch, the final soundtrack is the Isle of Wight
Yeah.
as well. So that probably adds to kind of why
Mhm.
that is called that.
And if you haven't seen our Witches episode, go and watch it.
We're going to say it every time. So
Yeah.
essentially, if you hear us mention an episode, please just go and watch any of them. You know, we go into the same type of folklore, the deep
Mhm.
sort of local stuff, and we all got onto the movies as well. So stick around for that as well. However, in folklore, the word white is almost always used to denote a supernatural, mysterious, or even fearful entity. So like in older folklore, white was used to distinguish between sort of different types of beings. So there was quick whites, which are like living, so sometimes referred to as the living human population, and there were dead whites, so like the spirits or the undead. So like more frequently it referred to like ghosts or spirits or entities sort of tied to the grave, and this usage is sort of more common in Norse/Icelandic sagas, where like a more powerful undead warrior is a type of white. Or like, for example, like I think they're pronounced like Draugas or Drauga. They're in Skyrim and stuff. That's where I know them from, but I always never know what they're pronounced. So if someone knows, please tell me. But that is, I think the word white does prop up in Skyrim at some point, even, funny enough, thinking about it. But yeah, that's quite interesting too.
That is really interesting. And a common feature of like whites with the two creatures that we just spoke about, being the quick whites and the dead whites, is often their connection to like a physical location, often like guarding it or embodying it. This is the most famous folklore usage, was actually for the barrow white, and a barrow is an ancient burial ground or tomb. So the barrow white is actually a malevolent undead spirit that inhabits, guards, and animates the grave goods and bodies within the barrow. So it's a creature of immense territorial power, bound to the earth of the grave. And it's terrifying because it preys on the living, drawing them into the darkness of the tomb just to kill them off, often with the power of suggestion or paralysis. Which, if that wasn't like terrifying enough, we also have the land wights or landvatir in Norse mythology again. And they are supernatural beings or spirits that protect or embody the health and fertility of the land, so mountains, lakes and forests and farms. And while they are typically benign or neutral creatures, they do demand respect.
So I mean, there's many different types of whites, whether they're like more benevolent or nice, or not. It's still kind of scary because there's so many forms of a white, isn't there?
So I would say that for that last one, it's like the tree man from the Isle of Wight, the Ent.
Sort of like the Ent of the Isle of Wight, which
he sounds like a land wight to me.
Kind of cool. I'd like to try and find this Ent, if there is such an Ent on the Isle of Wight, or like any folklore behind Ents, perhaps, or the idea of like a tree. Actually, we did speak about a tree in our fantasy fairytales episode, didn't we? Which is the dragon.
We did,
tree.
yes.
But the term gained massive modern recognition due to its powerful use in fantasy fiction, which often pulls directly from Old Norse and Old English sources. So, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien famously utilised barrow wights in The Lord of the Rings to represent the ancient lingering evil that tied to the ruined burial mounds in the Barrow Downs.
Ooh.
So the word white was actually utilised in Lord of the Rings as like a little connection to the Isle of Wight, which I remember when I read this and Jodie was sat next to me, I was like, oh.
He literally gasped out loud because he couldn't believe that the Isle of Wight was related to
something to do with
Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
And many modern fantasy series and sort of role-playing games use the term white to refer to a specific class of intelligent undead or icy creatures, often sort of retaining the folkloric association with guarding cold ancient tombs. So there is a lot of association with fantasy and the Isle of Wight and the word white and elves in general.
Yeah, and let's just take a little dabble in something further away from the Isle of Wight, we've got a story for you today about some elves that are not exactly on the nice list. So let's get into that with our boo or bust.
So for this week's Boo or Bust, as we have been doing for our recent episodes in particular, we have been reading some Reddit stories, and we want you to decide whether it's boo, as in real, or a bust, fake.
Yeah.
And this week we have dabbled into the paranormal subreddit, and this story comes from a user called Panic J, and the story is called I Never Believed in Elves. And yeah, we'll just be reading it to you, and we'll let you know what we think at the end, and then you just let us know what you think in the comments.
So let's get right into it, shall we?
It's a great idea.
I never even thought about elves before I had my first experience with them. I used to spend the night at my friend's quite often. Her parents became almost more my friends than my friend herself. They always told me about their paranormal occurrences, and they were always so fascinating. I wish I'd met them sooner. This particular night, my friend wasn't home, and neither was her brother, just her parents and I. While we were having this amazing dinner made by her mum, a Polish woman raised in Mexico and trained in world cuisine, she was telling me about how the elves on the bench had been specially naughty lately. I was confused because I wasn't sure if I had heard her correctly. By the elves on the bench, you mean the dolls sitting on the tiny bench outside the bathroom? She confirmed I heard correctly. She then told me that because of the time of year and certain cosmic or environmental events happening, I really can't remember what it was, she had been busy with the elves more than usual.
I asked her to describe how they'd been keeping her so busy. The girl is always the hardest to find. Sometimes I won't see her for days and find her in places where I know I had looked, she told me. The other two are loud and they just like to get dirty. I have to constantly wipe the mud off their shoes. I did it again this morning. To say the least, I was sceptical, and I didn't know why, because I've always trusted everything they said, even the more fantastical of stories prior. All I could reply with was, huh? How interesting. We finished dinner, cleaned up, and went upstairs to watch a movie as we usually did. We watched a comedy, and I completely forgot about the elves. After the movie, we went to bed. I slept in my friend's room, and her parents went straight to theirs. We closed our doors and I fell asleep almost immediately. It must have been between 2 and 4 a.m. when I woke up feeling kind of uneasy. My friend's room was right across the bench where the elves sat, but I wasn't thinking about them. I started listening for something that might explain why I felt uneasy, but all I could hear was the loud ass snoring come from the parents' room. I decided to try and go back to sleep, and the reason I was feeling uncomfortable was because of all the spicy food before going to bed. As soon as I closed my eyes, I heard tiny little laughs and tiny little steps.
I could feel my breath freezing in my chest, my stomach dropping, and my eyes sprung wide open. I could still hear them snoring, loud and uninterrupted, mechanical. And the little laughs and the little steps ceased, the same way children stop when you catch them in the middle of doing something they shouldn't be. They knew I was aware of them. It felt like forever before they started scrambling around, and little by little the laughs resumed, but not as loud as before. And I could see them. Not fully since the door was closed, but I saw shadows from the slit under the door. I was terrified, but almost equally excited. I forced myself to sleep, and I managed to, but it wasn't a restful sleep. When I woke up again in the morning, I could still hear my friend's parents snoring, a little more quietly. No other sounds. I must have debated for about half an hour if I should open the door and wait for them to wake up, so that they can be the first out of their rooms. But I couldn't wait for too much longer before Mother Nature made her call loud and clear. I took a deep breath and opened the door, and there they were, all three of them, sitting there, and I would have thought I had had a wildly vivid dream until I noticed the mud on their feet.
There you go.
Ooh.
That's quite good. I like that one.
Yeah, that was... Oh.
That was interesting.
Very, very interesting.
So that was the I Never Believed in Elves story. Let us know in the comments, whether you're on Spotify or on YouTube. What do you think, whether it's a boo or a bust?
I think it was a boo.
Yeah?
I think that those elves were up to some little bit of midnight mischief for you.
Yes.
Or post-midnight mischief, because it was at 3 a.m.
Yes.
You know what I mean.
I know what you mean. But yeah, that, to me, I'd say I'd put it as a boo. I mean, it's hard to tell because obviously it's a child. You know, you can obviously being told things before bed, and perhaps it could play on your mind. But yet, it was the ending of seeing the mud on their feet. That was the kind of the turning point of like, oh,
yeah,
you know, maybe it did actually happen type thing. So.
Also, that would absolutely be terrifying. Imagine if you woke up in the middle of the night and heard tiny little laughs outside of your room.
I wouldn't be able to sleep.
I wouldn't be able to sleep.
How did that person get back to sleep? That's what
I would
wanna know.
like wrap something around the door handle so that nobody could get in.
I'd go out there and beat the crap out of whatever the hell was making that racket.
Mawashigari to their little hats.
If you know karate, that is a roundhouse. There you go. So let us know. Link is in the description for this story. But speaking about little mischievous things that in the house
That maybe shouldn't come out at night.
perhaps shouldn't come out at night, that leaves us straight onto our Silver Scream.
As usual for the Silver Scream, we are of course going to give you guys a movie quote just to give you a little hint before we go into the section itself.
So the quote goes as follows, and obviously let us know if you got it, but I'm sure from the title, this is probably the easiest one you can probably get just from the title of the podcast alone. But if for some reason you haven't got it, then here's the quote for you. This is part of the longer quote, but I just took a snippet out, so here we go. No matter how much he cries, no matter how much he begs, never feed him after midnight. That is one of the rules within the 1984 horror comedy Gremlins. So,
Such an amazing film. I got so excited I just bashed the desk.
very nice.
Hope you enjoyed that.
That's
the Gremlins theme that we'll be getting
Gremlins
into.
theme. So it'll probably be
in the
stuck in
next
your head
section.
like it has been ours actually recently. We started singing it ourselves at the exact same time.
We
out
did.
of nowhere.
Yeah.
A few days ago, we just looked at each other like, whoa.
And
we are somehow
if you have seen the film,
connected.
then you are very cultured, and I'm very proud of you, because everybody should have seen it, because everybody needs a little gizmo in their life.
They do.
Yes.
It's very important.
It's a very, very, very good film. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it.
Go and watch it.
You have to see it. It's amazing.
It's brilliant.
It really is.
And it's quite funny as well. Obviously, like I say, Gremlins is essentially a horror comedy, and it is kind of again in that sort of 1980s style. It sort of blended the two genres together, like some films that we've spoken about recently. But here's a little plot summary if you're living under a rock again, if you haven't seen Gremlins for whatever reason. If you're in the UK, it's actually coming, and if you're near a Cineworld cinema, I think other cinemas, it's actually one of the Christmas movies to go and watch for like £2, I think. So now's your chance to go and see it on the big screen, to go and see it in like its glory, and it's sort of witty, wacky ways.
Yeah.
But here's a little plot summary for you, if you don't know about the story of Gremlins.
So, the story follows a young Billy Peltzer who receives a mysterious furry creature called a Mogwai, who he names Gizmo, from his inventor father. However, the Mogwai comes with 3 specific, strict, non-negotiable rules. The first one, keep it away from bright lights and sunlight. Number 2, never let it get wet. And number 3, never feed it after midnight. Billy accidentally breaks the second rule, causing Gizmo to multiply rapidly, spawning several new, aggressive and mischievous Mogwai. The aggressive Mogwai trick Billy into feeding them after midnight, causing them to transform into destructive, scaly, and intelligent little monsters known as Gremlins, led by their vicious little leader, Stripe.
Mm-hmm.
The Gremlins descend upon the town of Kingston Falls on Christmas Eve, wreaking havoc, sabotaging electrical systems, and terrorising the citizens. And we're going to leave it there, because obviously, as usual, we don't want to spoil it.
No.
But if that doesn't sound like a good time, then I don't know what does.
It's not meant to be taken overly seriously. I mean, it's like little fuzzy creatures that turn into scaly ones.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from our good friend Gizmo.
Yeah.
Who go around and essentially just terrorise the sort of neighbourhood. And, of course, it spawned Gremlins 2, which I think is just as good, really. And actually, they announced this year that they are making a third one, funnily enough.
I'm not sure if I've even seen the second one.
Have you not?
I don't know.
It's going to be done by Chris Columbus again, who did the first 2 Harry Potter movies. Because he did these ones as well.
Yeah.
So...
Very interesting. We'll have to go and see that.
Who knows? Who knows what it'll be like? Do you want to see Gremlins 3? Do you think they should do another one?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We'll see. We will see what happens. But in regards to a little bit of the influence and the legacy behind Gremlins, it sort of defined, again, the dark comedy horror subgenre, in which we spoke about in a few episodes previously. And Gremlins was very successful in blending horror and dark comedy, and in this case, holiday cheer in terms of the Christmas season, in a way that was highly novel for a mainstream film. And it showed that creatures could simultaneously be cute, mischievous, and even genuinely deadly.
I remember watching this film as a kid, and the evil Gremlins absolutely terrified me.
Yes, Stripe always scared me, his white mohawk.
Mm-hmm.
He was he's a bit freaky. Because I always had a bit of a fear of the VHS cover of Gremlins.
Oh, really?
Because that's what I remember watching it on for the first time, was on VHS.
I watched it on VHS as well, yeah.
So that's quite cool. But the film's unique tone, which sort of mixed whimsical sort of suburban family life with anarchic sort of violent destruction, directly influenced a generation of films that mix sort of cartoonish absurdity with real big stakes, essentially. Such as Tim Burton's Beetlejuice and countless creature features that sort of followed. So, for example, critters and ghoulies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there's a wide variety, but Gremlins was sort of the OG, if that makes sense, of it sort of did it the best out of these sort of mini little creature features.
100%. And where it was one of the best for its time, and even nowadays, I would say. Along with films like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Gremlins was actually central to a controversy regarding the MPAA film rating system. And that's because the violence and moments of genuine horror were deemed too intense for a simple PG rating, but not quite serious enough for an R rating. So the result was that the public outcry from parents directly led to Steven Spielberg, who produced both films, to petition the MPAA. And the petition basically resulted in the creation of the PG-13 rating in August of 1984, fundamentally changing the landscape of Hollywood action and horror films marketed towards teenagers.
I had no idea that Gremlins was the reason that PG-13 existed.
I had no idea either, but it makes a lot of sense because it is quite gory.
Yeah,
actually.
There's gruesome stuff, especially the blender and the microwave scene.
Oh yeah, the blender bit was what really shook me up.
It is graphic, but even if it's
graphic.
Just graphic with the creatures, their guts getting blended up, or the microwave, them exploding and stuff. It is quite graphic for just a kids film, a PG.
Yeah,
you'd go and take your kids to see Shrek in obviously about 20 years time ish. But I mean that doesn't surprise me. And again, it's funny how it mentions Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, because that film has also got quite a lot of scary stuff, with Mularam with the hearts when he pulls out of people's chest, and the whole
Kalima.
Yes, exactly. And the monkey brains and stuff at the table, and they ate all the animals. It's quite gruesome.
Very gruesome.
Um,
But just because it's not counted as like Indiana Jones obviously isn't counted as a horror film.
No.
It just is an action film with plenty of like realistic kind of gut churning aspects to it.
Especially the second movie, The Temple of Doom.
Yeah.
That was always the scariest one I always
Yeah.
found in terms of like watching it when I was younger.
And where Gremlins is marketed like for the most part as a family friendly movie.
Yeah.
You get to those scenes and you think, oh my god,
Whoa.
like what's family friendly about this?
But it's such a classic. I'm not surprised it had like a petition, again, PG-13, invented by Gremlins.
But one of the less PG-13 aspects of the film is obviously the little superstar of Gizmo, who is the cutest little creature you will ever see in your entire life. And the character Gizmo actually became an immediate cultural icon, as he should be, and a merchandising sensation across the globe. And that's because the desire for a cute furry creature that turns bad basically fueled toy sales and subsequent creature films, like we just mentioned a second ago. This also spiraled across into the 3 rules trope that they started making for different creature films. So where we just said a second ago that the 3 rules that they kept for the Mogwai became instantly recognizable, creating really popular cinematic tropes that were simply rule breaking, that would lead to catastrophic, like, supernatural consequences. The film, like, even subverted the whole, like, wholesome idea of Christmas, because that's the time of year that it's set, turning the holiday season into a backdrop for mayhem, essentially. And this influenced so many other dark holiday, like, comedy films and even dark horror festive films.
It kind of gave everyone sort of like the go-ahead of like, oh, it's fine to make Christmas films perhaps more
scary,
manic than like they're not, because realistically Christmas is quite a manic time of the year, and a lot of people, you know, would agree. I think especially that it is manic, buying presents and, you know, financial situations and, you know, the cold and trying to organise seeing family and all this kind of stuff. It's manic. Christmas is manic. So Gremlins embodies how manic Christmas can be.
It does, yeah.
But Gremlins actually use very advanced puppetry, and it very much was a technical landmark, especially for its time, where it utilised sort of groundbreaking puppetry and animatronics to bring the large cast of Gremlins to life. The expressive faces of Gizmo and the terrifying appearances of, like, say, Stripe and the others showcased the height of practical effects before CGI became like the dominant use of like creating creatures in film.
And obviously, you know how we feel about practical effects. You know that we think that they're superior, because they are. And again, the 80s was just the perfect, like, pinnacle time for physical prosthetics and animatronics and
all these different technologies.
Just the real presence of, like, practical effects.
It was great. It's just like, it set that sort of path for, you know, you had like American Werewolf in the same decade. You had, you know, this were in the same decade. You had loads of science fiction films that sort of use practical effects. Like Star Wars, for example. These films all kind of, you know, I know Star Wars was more like late 70s and early 80s, but it kind of pushed that notion of using movie magic through practical effects, really. So it's so believable as well.
It is.
You don't think of them and think, oh, it's a puppet. It's like you see them as characters.
Well, they're created, you know, so well that, like, they do just convey, like, realism because of how they're created. They're so, like,
expressionistic, aren't they?
And the people that created them had so much talent that you can just, like,
you can see it.
It's unbelievable when you're watching it, because you can't believe that they're not real. However, as there usually is with a lot of these films, there is, of course, a little darker snippet. And for this, it was actually related to the script. So, Chris Columbus, who obviously, like, wrote this film, as well as the Harry Potter ones that you just spoke about a second ago, he did the original screenplay for Gremlins. However, the original version was actually significantly darker. In that version, not only did the Gremlins just destroy the town, but they actually killed Billy's mother and threw her severed head down the stairs.
Jeez.
I know.
That would have definitely not been
PG.
PG.
Is much darker. Yeah, definitely not PG-13. And also in the original script, Gizmo was intended to turn into the main villain, Stripe. However, Steven Spielberg insisted that the creature should remain cute and good, forcing Columbus to create the secondary Mogwai character of Stripe to be the antagonist, so that they still had the little classic trope of good and evil in the film.
That kind of gives it that family-esque oriented thing, instead of like the one cute thing has turned into something like disgusting and scary. And
it's literally like just making me smile, like thinking about Gizmo, because he's so cute.
He's probably like birthed like the idea of even like Grogu as in like Baby Yoda type thing, because I know people like, so there's similarities. So that kind of like sweet cute creature. And
I'm pretty sure it's where like the entire idea of Furbies came from.
Gizmo. You can definitely see the interplay and the
Furbies
inspiration.
Are like terrifying. You know, they're like talking stuff by themselves when you got the batteries out of them.
Yeah, I saw the video on the Instagram. This guy skinned this.
They get
Furby.
like possessed a lot. There's a lot of like possessed Furby videos online.
Not surprised they use them for like some type of weird possession. These paranormal entities. However, going to a little bit more like the trivia side of things you might not know about Gremlins if you've seen it. If you haven't seen it, you definitely won't know this. But Kate, who's a character in Gremlins' famous dark monologue explaining why she hates Christmas, essentially because of her father passing away trying to climb down the chimney dressed as Santa, was nearly actually cut from the final film. And director Joe Dante and Steven Spielberg argued whether the scene was too dark for the film's tone, and Spielberg ultimately insisted of keeping it in, and said it was necessary to inject some genuine horror and ground the film, which is like influenced by psychological darkness of other films, essentially. So again, a lot of Spielberg influence in Gremlins. I think that he tried toning it down from essentially being a more dangerous, dark, scary, gruesome movie, and made it sort of on the cusp so that more people could access it, which is
really smart.
Quite a nice idea, I think.
For the next little bit of trivia for you, the Gremlins were actually controlled by really like complex cables and hydraulics and rods, like any other animatronics usually are. However, this made them incredibly difficult and time-consuming to film. The production was notorious for being slow, and the creatures were very, very expensive to make and to operate. Each gremlin and puppet cost around $40,000 to make. This meant that getting the Mogwai wet involved a really tricky scene where like water was like poured onto Gizmo. The water caused the foam puppets to short out and to seize up, essentially, making the simple multiplication scene a huge technical challenge during filming.
It sounds like a complete nightmare to me. As in like the idea of the logistics of making that look real and believable and not just stupid.
Well, elves do bring nightmares.
There we go.
So do Gizmos, apparently.
Gizmo and Mogwais, whatever. They are little pointy-eared.
I feel like those would be really good names for when we like get a dog.
Gizmo.
Yeah,
Mogwai.
Gizmo or Mogwai.
Or Stripe.
Or we get two and we call one Gizmo and one Mogwai.
That's a great idea, actually. I think it's a great idea. So both director Joe Dante and producer Steven Spielberg make brief, fun cameos actually in Gremlins. Dante actually appears as the man who brushes against Billy's mother's shoulder in the phone booth. And Spielberg is briefly seen sitting on a tricycle reading a newspaper as Mrs. Teagle's house is being demolished by the Gremlins. So little cameos there from the producer and the director, which
I love it when
it's quite common.
People
actually
do that.
You said that about like Wes Craven in Scream. He does that as well. Yeah. Which is quite cool, actually.
For our last little goofy or like hidden fact that we've got, the scene where the Gremlins gather in the movie theatre to watch Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was actually specifically chosen because the Gremlins were created in the image of early Disney animation, and the film is a classic example of a really dark fairy tale type like storytelling.
That does make sense, to be fair.
It really does, yeah.
That they're all kind of almost like the Seven Dwarfs-esque, but they're the little creatures.
The hundreds of little gremlins.
But they're not very nice like the dwarves, like the dwarves are. So Yeah.
But going on to something that is nice is
very interesting.
The very iconic and very catchy soundtrack for the film. So that leads us into Shivering Soundtracks.
So for our Shivering Soundtracks, we are going back to a very notable composer who seems to prop up all the time in our podcast by mistake, but also by a happy accident, because this is our good friend Jerry Goldsmith, who actually did the music to Poltergeist and Alien, which we spoke about in our Poltergeist episode and our Aliens episode. So Jerry Goldsmith has blessed a lot of 80s/late 70s horror movies with his expertise horror orchestral music, where the majority of the film's atmosphere is actually defined by the original score composed by the legendary Jerry, where he created the instantly recognisable Gremlin theme, which is a very driving, rhythmic and slightly mischievous 4-note motif. Again, that kind of catchy theme perfectly sort of encapsulates the creature's chaotic and sort of anarchic sort of nature of their characters. And the theme is synthesized and percussion heavy, and it drives all of the action sequences. So really, this is very different to Jerry Goldsmith's work in Poltergeist and Alien, which are much more traditional orchestra and atmospheric and drone-like. So they sort of sit there and like make you sort of wonder, and all these woodwinds are like all around. But this is like driving, rhythmic kind of synths, which is completely like different.
It is different, and not only is that different, but also the actual theme for Gizmo himself is completely different. In contrast to the Gremlins theme, Goldsmith really wanted to compose like a softer, more emotional and sentimental theme for Gizmo, and that's because the warm and like gentle music that is shown in his scenes, particularly with like the film's like family themes, it really just projects the vulnerability of the Mogwai and what they're meant to be like.
Yeah, there's sort of that kind of complete contrast. It will make anyone who watches the film, when you hear the different pieces of music, it'll dictate how you feel about each character. And
also just as the like rules and obviously the story does anyway, the music in this film really does take you on a journey, like
it does,
with the characters.
It does. It's a perfect example of contrast, of leitmotifs, how the characters are represented just through music.
So it's done so well.
And even the Gremlins theme, it isn't necessarily serious, as you could hear from Jodie's amazing interpretation of the soundtrack.
I think it was pretty good.
Yes, and that wasn't sarcasm. I promise.
He's lying.
I'm lying. No, I'm joking. But the
leave a comment below if you think that my interpretation of the Gremlins soundtrack was good or not.
Yeah, and it's nice that you allowed people to say if it was good or not.
Yeah.
Because it means they can say no if they want to.
Give this video a thumbs up if you think it was good, and give it a thumbs up if you think it was bad.
Just give it a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Subscribe if you think it was good or bad.
Ask your nan if she thought it was good or not.
Please.
Yeah.
Please. But anyway, Goldsmith essentially effectively blended the traditional orchestra of the horror scoring that he's like very well known for having done, with synthesizers, creating like very, very intense suspense that shifts quickly into the fun, destructive pace of the Gremlins sort of antics. So, like I said, I was going to say earlier, the theme isn't meant to be taken very seriously because it's quite mischievous rather than frightening, if that makes sense. So that kind of adds again to that kind of more family oriented, like pushing it to younger teenagers instead of like being like an 18 or something, or a 15 like equivalent,
Yeah, 100%. And where it was obviously with synthesizers, like Sam just said, the 80s was the perfect time for that, because just like we've said previously for Halloween and even in Alien as well, synthesizers were used, and this was really the time for them to like take off and become the crucial instruments that they are today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not only was that obviously heavily used in the film, But the film also heavily kind of uses pop and novelty songs, especially with it being in the Christmas setting. This was really used to like enhance that, as well as like being associated with the inappropriate gremlins, like rebellious attitude that they have. They used several popular tracks in the film to really like push out these feelings. The film features several like traditional Christmas songs, most notably Darlene's Love, which is the famous track like Christmas or like Baby Please Come Home. And this really helps to establish obviously the holiday season and setting for the film before it gets violently disrupted. And the gremlins often even interact with music themselves during some of the scenes. So for the infamous like bar scene, it features a song that really emphasizes their out of control like revelry, and even the soundtrack for the entire film closes with like Gremlins Mega Madness, which is by the group Michael Sembello, reflecting like the really high energy, fun and like chaos that the film inevitably caused.
Yeah. I always think about the Gremlins singing the Christmas carol outside the house.
Yeah, that's one of my favourite scenes.
It's so crap, but
yeah.
they do it because they're taking the piss, you know. And it's so like ironic in the sense of it, and it really encapsulates like who they are, and that's such an interesting like way of doing music, because we get the idea because they dress up all Christmassy and they've got like their little Christmas carol like book of like all the song lyrics and stuff.
But they can't read it anyway.
But they can't read, hence why they're all just staring at her and like laughing and being like idiots essentially.
Yeah.
It's so well
just
done.
being little shits really, aren't they?
Being little shits indeed. But in regards to the Gremlins' voices, if we're talking about like sounds, while not technically part of like the score, obviously, the highly recognisable sort of chattering and cackling and shrieking of the Gremlins is like a cornerstone of the film's impeccable sound design.
Yeah.
Where their vocalizations, which sort of like range from like maniacal laughter to sort of the guttural snarls, add immensely to their characterization as unpredictable agents of complete chaos.
Yeah.
So, you know, mixed with the soundtrack, mixed with the sound design and everything else we spoke about, it is a chaotic movie.
It really, really is.
It's a great holiday classic if you want to watch something that's a little bit different. If you want to watch something that's, you know, not too like stupid, in the sense you got stupid Christmas films that like blend horror and, you know, slasher stuff with the Christmas theme, and it's just like kind of like, come on, that's stupid.
Yeah.
But this is kind of like one that blends the two perfectly, and it's just iconic. So
it really does. And even if you're just bored of watching like normal Christmas films anyway, I mean, not that you could ever be bored of The Grinch, but if for some reason you are bored of The Grinch, then first of all, don't be bored of The Grinch. Second of all, go and watch Gremlins.
Yeah, Gremlins.
Or even if you're
bored
of Elf.
Yeah.
Or bored of The Snowman. Like, who knows?
Whatever it is, Gremlins is a great change up.
Go and watch Gremlins, because not only do you get a little bit of bad from their behaviour, you get a little bit of boo from the whole process of them turning into their little gremlins anyway.
I like what you did there.
But
bad and boo.
You also just get a little bit of festivity as well.
Absolutely.
And the family feelings, which we will always nurture. Just look at it as the perfect little like bad boo Christmas film, because it's about family, which you guys are to us, and then it's obviously anarchic and chaotic and a mess, but also from a supernatural like variety.
It is. Jodie summed it up beautifully.
It's got everything that you could ever wish for.
Absolutely.
And it really is just an amazing film, so definitely go and watch it. But on the subject of little like masters of mischief,
or little shits, as Jodie said earlier,
that leads us on to our ghostly gossip section.
So for this week's ghostly gossip, we are, instead of talking about a little bit of folklore, because we've covered most of that in our Mystic Matter, so we're not going to repeat ourselves, we are going to go down the little subject of talking about these masters of mischief, or little shits, as I like to say, or like Jodie likes to say, which are the Elves on the Shelf, and we have found another little horror story that was written by, I believe, a mother of a child who experienced this weird phenomena.
This is actually from a mum blog.
Yes, so this is
it is a little bit gossipy.
It's a bit gossipy, but again, it's not a boo or a bust. We're not going to talk about whether we think it's real or not. We're just going to talk about it, read the story, and to see what you guys think.
Yeah.
Just another little story for you all to enjoy this time around.
Upon our research, we found this story, and it is uploaded onto the Knoxville Mums website.
We'll leave a link in the description.
We certainly will. And it's called Elf on the Shelf, a horror story. And it was uploaded by Rachel DeAngelis on the 14th of December 2021.
So quite recent. So it's like 4 years ago.
Relatively. And the story goes as follows. I realise that Elf on the Shelf is a controversial topic, lodged firmly in between people who own multiple Christmas trees and people who prefer white string lights or multicoloured. But I'm only opening this can of worms so I can share my horror story and perhaps save a few lives in the process. I had successfully avoided Elf on the Shelf for the first several years of my children's lives, but this year I caved. I heard somewhere that someone would be awarding a prize to the mum who created the best Christmas magic. That's still true, right? So I threw my hat into the ring.
My first mistake was starting with elf babies, harvested fresh from the branches of an evergreen tree on Thanksgiving Day, as per the folklore that I had made up on the spot for my children. It was my intention that the elf babies would grow into elf children and then eventually grow into elf adults. However, my 7-year-old quickly became terrified of the elf babies. While they are adorable and seen by the light of day, they apparently take on a sinister appearance in the dead of night. He woke up at 3 a.m. on multiple occasions and swore that the elf babies were standing at the end of his bed, holding hands with each other and staring at him menacingly, with their shadow exaggerated largely on the wall by the glow of the nightlight.
He's convinced that it wasn't a dream and that it actually happened. I tried to assure my child that he was merely the victim of an overactive imagination, but in the days following his nighttime terrors, I started to notice strange occurrences going on in our house, and I was struggling to come up with a reasonable explanation. I lost my car keys one day, and finally managed to find them in a place where I would never put them. I found doors unlocked overnight when I know for a fact that I locked them. Important papers have gone missing, you name it, and it's happened. After each of these strange occurrences, my youngest calmly took my hand and explained to me in a slow, exaggerated voice, the kind that you use to explain a complicated situation to a child who doesn't understand, that the elf babies have been the culprits behind all of these events, and he seemed so sure of it.
A couple of times I placed the elf babies carefully on the kitchen counter and then turned around to find them gone. One day I went to both boys in a shrieky sort of panic, asking if they'd seen the elf babies, and my youngest found them in a weird place that none of us had put them. Now I'm starting to wonder if the elves had supernatural powers, or maybe my kids are just using Elf on the Shelf to keep my behaviour in line. What is happening? In any case, this has all taken a turn from Christmas cheer into some kind of horror movie plot, and I determined to safely lock the elf babies in the cabinet from which they will never escape to terrorise a family again, per my son's middle of the night tearful request. And still, they were not in the cabinet the next morning. Instead, I found them in the bathroom sink, and they had multiplied somehow.
Naturally, I decided to do what anyone troubled with a demon, poltergeist, ghost, or frightening supernatural being would do. I sent them in the mail to my friends. One elf baby arrived safely at its destination, much to my former friends' horror and dismay. One elf baby became lost in transit, and the US Postal Service can't tell me exactly where it's going to end up. Better check your mailbox. This is my PSA to do your family a favour and refrain from inviting these little elf terrorists into your homes this holiday season. Please and thank you. Time for me to go and stock up on some holy water.
So that's a little bit of like a gossipy blog type thing. So we thought that would be quite an interesting change up for our ghostly gossip, because it's quite gossipy, like we say. But the actual story, I realised, I think actually includes pictures.
Yeah.
That are actually, I mean, some of them I think have been set up in certain places, but the one particularly in the sink and the one with the letter, I think I like the genuine like ones that these are the actual babies, the elf babies that this person actually speaks about. So as far as I'm aware, these are the real ones. So yeah, we'll leave the link in the description to that. So it's quite a little interesting bit of elf gossip, if you like, so little shits around the house. So
spooky seasonal shits.
Spooky seasonal shits. Hopefully you won't be having any spooky seasonal shits after your Christmas dinner.
Yes.
If you get what I mean.
I might be, because I'm gluten intolerant and I'm going to be eating all the Yorkshire puddings I can.
Yes, and all the potatoes. All the tartars. But
speaking of spooky seasonal things, that leads us on to our spooky spotlight for the week. For the spooky spotlight for this episode, as I said, it is seasonal. However, not the seasonal that you probably are thinking about. You're probably thinking that I'm going to say something Christmassy. However, this isn't actually that Christmassy. This is more towards the season of Halloween, but I believe it's open from the start of spring all the way through until the later winter months. And that is because our spooky spotlight for this episode is, again, as we mentioned in a previous episode, Black Gang Chine, but specifically the incredibly famous attraction, and arguably the best thing there in my opinion.
I think it's always been my favourite.
Of Rumpus Mansion.
Yes. So this is very niche, and you might be thinking, what the hell is Rumpus Mansion? But we'll probably just leave a link in the description. Rumpus Mansion, what it looks like for you to...
And just the entire fairytale area.
Yeah, so it sort of situates itself within the fairytale area of Black Gang Chine, which is a theme park.
Is it called Fairyland?
Yes, Fairyland, which is the oldest theme park in the UK, actually. It was in the 1800s that it was forged. But we wanted to speak a little bit about Rumpus Mansion because of it's sort of got allusions to dark folklore and fairy tale stuff. But it has a lot of mischievous elves that go around. Essentially, it's a walk through dark attraction. So kind of like your horror haunted house type thing. But it's kind of weirdly nostalgic, creepy, because it's got old animatronics in there, so it's not new and all done up. But there's mischievous elves in there.
Oh, it's so cool in there.
And the sound effects and there's little jump scare points, and I say it's all about the whole backstory behind the attraction is that they've come to basically invaded this house, and now all the human beings in the house are run and dictated by these elves, which actually links back really to what we're speaking about in our Mystic Matter.
It's a very, very similar story to Gremlins, and Gremlins. It basically follows the entire mythology that we'll be talking about surrounding elves. Yep.
In the sense that they are mischievous and they kind of like things being done their own way. But the attraction's really interesting because it combines Isle of Wight folklore and fantasy folklore with mainly like elves, essentially. So really, if you're coming to the Isle of Wight or if you're in the UK, it's worth a visit to Black Gang Chine just to go around Rumpus Mansion. If you love your folklore, if you're interested in like the Isle of Wight stuff as well, please go to Black Gang Chine and please make your way to Fairyland, because Rumpus Mansion is so worth it.
It is really worth it.
And it's always been my favourite. I mean, it's always one when you're a kid and you kind of like, it's like a big thing to go in there. It's kind of, it's a very old house, and it's like all the chimes of the bells in there. And you're kind of like, oh,
and you have to read the signs on the way up to it.
Yeah.
There's a very specific path to follow,
and
it gives you the entire story as you're going all the way up.
It says like story of boggarts and elves and goblins have come to the house to, and of course mischief, and you're basically walking through seeing all these elves and stuff. It's just really cool. You just have to go and see it. There is probably something on YouTube.
It's a whole experience.
We might leave a link
itself.
on YouTube to for the walkthrough, a final walkthrough for it. But we just thought our spooky spotlight will shine a light on something local to us, but a great piece of folklore, and of course because it's the Isle of Wight, and now we know what the Isle of Wight word actually means.
The Isle of supernatural beings.
Isle of supernatural creatures and beings, it's a no-brainer.
Yep, so it's the Isle of Supernatural Beings and it's nicknamed Ghost Island. So can it get even spookier over here? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
But also, if you don't believe us when we say that Rumpus Mansion is cool, Johnny Depp was going to buy it.
Johnny Depp himself,
Yeah.
Mr. Edward Scissorhands, Mr. Jack Sparrow, you name it, was...
Mr. Dior Savage.
Yeah, Mr. Savage with his guitar and whatnot, was going to actually buy that house,
Yeah.
allegedly, and live upstairs in it. Well, own the house, essentially. So that's another little fact. I know we did mention it before, but Johnny Depp likes Rumpus Mansion, so you're going to like it.
Exactly.
That's the bottom line.
But unfortunately, something that you're not going to like is that we're at the end of today's episode.
Oh dear, we have reached the end. But do not worry, we will obviously be back for plenty more. We've got a few more Christmassy episodes to come, so no need to fret.
So if you have scurried your way through tonight's episode of Mischief, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more Bad Brew updates and new episodes, and there's plenty more frights, flicks and folklore to come.
You can also haunt us on socials at Bad Brew Productions, where you can interact and leave suggestions for future episodes or contribute through polls and posts.
And if you're after more creepy content, then our Patreon is live. So if you'd like to hear and even see more of us, then head over there for exclusive Boo Crew videos, stories and live streams.
So that's all from us for this mischievous episode today. We've been your haunted hosts, Sam and Jodie, unravelling the dark so you don't have to, hoping this episode keeps you off the naughty list. And until next time, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember,